Thanks, Rebecca. It's really great to be here, be back in Perth. I've really had an amazing time over the last couple of days. And congratulations to Jason. We just met on this trip, and that was just so amazing and inspiring. I covet your energy, really, really quite amazing. And it's just a testament to how easy it is to actually make change, actually, if you just put your mind to it and put a little energy behind it. Who would have imagined, say, 7, 8 years ago, that something like an app could disrupt entire industries? That Airbnb, for example, or Uber would kind of change the way that kind of we hire taxis or cars to drive us around. Who would imagine something that as simple as that? And when you think about that, you think about, there's some things that, like the US election, for example, who would have imagined what would happen, that an election could be disrupted by technology and people with mendacious kind of ideas, but let's not go there because we could get into that quagmire and not ever get out of it. What I like to think about are what are those kind of things that we really would like to disrupt? And I would say at the top of my list would be the urban development process. Just as Jason was talking about, you look at sort of where we were sort of 50, 60 years ago, and you look at where we are today, the kind of places, some of the images that he showed you, and you think, how is it that we have arrived at building that, when we could have had something much better? So how do we get beyond these kind of sometimes crappy places, the places that kind of have no soul or character, the places that, as Gertrude Stein once said, there's no there. How do we kind of do that? And don't get me wrong, because I think there's some things that are really quite fantastic. Just while I was here, I saw the Treasury buildings that were kind of repurposed into these wonderful restaurants, and I thought, that's so cool. Yesterday, my friend Margot took me down to Fremantle, and I walked the streets there, and I thought, wow, this is something where you can see the character, the history of the place, but it's kind of reborn in a really cool place, in a cool way, where you've got the old port along with all the other kind of crazy activity that's going on there. So don't get me wrong, I think there's still amazing things going on that are quite great. But there's, I would say more than not, there are kind of really terrible urban planning that happens in many of our cities. And it wasn't always this way. There was a centuries-old tradition of building places where you had quality, where there was character, places that were walkable, places that had high-quality building with really a keen eye for aesthetics. So what happened? Well, what happened was that this centuries-old practice was disrupted by a whole lot of things. And I think chief among them was the car, the impact that the car has had on the built environment. Think about the kind of then modernism and how the introduction of modernism disrupted many of the places that these big windswept plazas became in fashion, and that kind of disrupted what it was like to walk around a city. I would say the professionalization of the urban planning practice, and the compartmentalization into traffic planners and urban design planners and stuff. So there's so many different things that have disrupted the sort of centuries-old good practice of building amazing quality of places. And that should give us hope, actually, that we can disrupt the current system into something that's much better than it is. And that's really sort of what started to happen in the 1970s, when urbanists sort of got together and they kind of looked around primarily at the public realm, and they thought, oh my God, this is shit. How do we get here, and how do we fix it? And what they all agreed was, we have to be more intentional about the way we build quality of place. We have to kind of look at all these things that are preventing it, and we have to actively work to develop systems, processes, to actually knit sort of our places back together. And I think that kind of disruption sort of is something that our work is about at Artscape. So this morning I'm going to talk to you a little bit about creative placemaking. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Artscape and how we're trying to disrupt through art the way that sort of we build quality of place. So my organization is a 30-year-old not-for-profit urban development organization, and our mission is to make space for creativity and transform communities. We do this primarily by clustering creative people together in real estate projects that sort of, on the one hand, provide affordable space to the creative community, but each of these projects is designed intentionally to play a larger role in the revitalization and transformation of the community and neighborhoods that they're part of. We've designed a community design process where we build these things from the ground up in the community in a way that responds both to the dreams and aspirations of artists, but also with many other people. And so the projects come in many different shapes and sizes, and you wouldn't be wrong and looking at these slides to think, well, Artscape is a real estate company, and in a way we are. That's really part of what we do. We've got all kinds of new stuff, about $70 million worth of new projects in development in Toronto, including this new City of the Arts project where we're building a center for creative sector art and design entrepreneurship, really. A new community cultural hub. One of our ambitions is to take the suburbs of Toronto and build a network of community cultural hubs that helps build kind of relationship between the arts community and the center and those on the fringes of the city. And we're actually working hand in hand with a lot of private developers. Most of what we're doing now is being built and financed by private sector partners, where we're building affordable housing for artist-led families and using that as a catalyst to bring communities and neighborhoods back to life. So all this looks like a lot of real estate, and there's no question that it is. We have, sorry, let me back up here. Currently, 11 projects in operation, another 4 under construction, and another 3 projects on the go in Vancouver, Canada as well. So all this kind of looks a lot like real estate, but actually our work is more about people. What we've learned at Artscape is how to work at the intersection of arts and culture, urban development, community and neighborhood activism, philanthropy, and public policy. And generally we're working with all those people, sort of in some slightly messy, but hopefully brilliant combination. And so it's really kind of, this work is really about how do you actually understand the divergent interests of the people sort of in a community, and how do you kind of rally them together around a common purpose, using culture as the way to actually bring people together, unite people around a shared vision. So collectively, our projects are now home to 2,700 people who are working and living, 150 organizations, 42 public venues. So all of that allows us to actually play an amazing role in the kind of transformation of communities and neighborhoods that we're part of. Last year, we just did a count. There were more than 5,000 activities and events that happened in our various facilities across the city, attended by about 250,000 people. So, you know, we were sort of really challenged about 10, 12 years ago to kind of describe our work to people. You know, people sort of in Europe have been calling this kind of work of clustering sort of creative people together, using art as a catalyst for regeneration, culture-led regeneration. And as we tried to explain that to people, they were kind of generally a perplexed look that came over people's faces. So we coined this term creative placemaking about 12 years ago, kind of to describe the work. And we sort of defined creative placemaking as leveraging the power of art and culture to act as a catalyst for change, growth, and transformation of place. This idea sort of has really kind of taken off, not just here, but sort of around the world. And it's kind of come to mean a lot of different things for different people. In the US in particular, sort of the National Endowment for the Arts and Art Place America and major American foundations pooled money to create creative placemaking initiatives and to influence public policy. And so creative placemaking now is a field of practice that encompasses a wide range of different activities. But what we've come to learn at Artscape, or believe at Artscape, is that it's the clustering phenomenon that is really the source of the power to actually make change in communities. Clusters of creative people are like other kinds of clusters, and you know, there are economic theorists, Michael Porter and many others, who've written about this idea of clustering, the kind of efficiency, the network effect, the kind of platform for innovation that kind of grows out of bringing clusters together. What's really interesting about when you bring a cluster of creative people together is that there's something a whole lot more that can happen. A lot of things that sometimes are intangible, but you can actually change the story of a place. You can actually change the distinctiveness of it. You can kind of build all kinds of new and interesting kind of things that can come up out of clustering creative people together. So our work really is focused at the building scale, although it can happen at other scales as well. And it's really about kind of developing projects that act like a point of urban acupuncture, a pinprick of urban change that can actually have a catalytic impact across a community or neighborhood. So I want to kind of illustrate one project that we've been working on in Toronto that I think is a good illustration of this. And it's a project in Regent Park, which is Canada's oldest and largest public housing development. It was an area that was built in the 1940s by our federal government as a low-income housing community. And on this kind of failed urban planning concept called the Garden City. The idea was to put up a bunch of towers in the middle of a park. It would be kind of idyllic, and all the poor people in the city could live there. And so this idea, which was replicated around the world, a 69-acre site, home to 7,500 low-income people, turned out to be an absolute urban planning disaster. All the vestiges of poverty very omnipresent in this community: crime, drugs, gangs, sort of hopelessness. There were no jobs. It was a food desert. And so the city, through its public housing agency, made a bold decision in 2001 to tear it all down and start over. And with this, one of the things that was interesting about the revitalization of Regent Park was that unlike some other large-scale revitalizations, there was a commitment to local people to return once the new houses were built. So right of return came with to all of the 7,500 low-income people. Grandmothers like this one were kind of leaders of this movement, and it really kind of grew out of their activism in the 1990s. There's also a kind of an amazing commitment as part of their social development plan to community or social infrastructure, and among those things was to have a place for culture. And so we started working sort of, I guess about 9 years ago with members of the community to imagine, well, what does culture mean in this context? People were quite rightly kind of suspicious, despite all the kind of stigma that had grown up around Regent Park. You couldn't get a pizza delivered there, cabs wouldn't go in there. People were fiercely proud of this place. And they said, who are you to come in and tell us what culture means in this context? And we said, well, that's not what we do. We actually are going to work with you to figure out what it means. And there was a grandmother on a steering committee who said to us one day, I'll never forget it, she said, we get it. We get how stigmatized our community is. People pick up the Toronto Star, they read about the latest shooting, they roll up their windows and they drive through as quickly as possible. What if we actually created a destination in Regent Park that was kind of open to the world? Rooted in Regent Park, but open to the world became the mantra, the slogan around which we all organized. And we built this amazing $38 million facility with some little bit of government money, a whole lot of philanthropy. And it's got a lot of amazing different things in it. It's got 5 different performance and event spaces, a floor dedicated to arts-based learning for children and youth. There's a Center for Social Innovation where 85 different social mission organizations work out of the top floor of this facility. And the impact that this has had over the first 5 years of its operation has been absolutely amazing. And this sort of is all very interesting, but I want to play for you now, or introduce you to one of the people who inspired the project, a young poet who was 14 years old when I met him, who decided that he had reached kind of a level of local acclaim. He decided he was going to quit his poetry because he had lost his hope for his neighborhood. And through our project and our sort of youth arts mentorship program, he kind of reignited his artistic passion. And I want to let an artist tell you about what this change means for him. And this is an homage. He wrote this piece on the opening of our project, and this was an homage to all of the other tenants in the organization. And I think it's a great illustration. Here he is at 14. He's a little bit older in this video. And bear with us, it's about a 5-minute video, but I think it's worth the watch. And I'll come back and talk a little bit about the kind of change that a young person seemingly powerless in a community can actually have in changing and rewriting the story of this place.
every chance, now an opportunity to enhance from the spectrum of open gates. Experience, learn and innovate. Region Park, a home to the arts, hidden in hearts and active in minds. Creative gifts manifest and you'll find open, and not just your eyes to depict the beauty in the park, often sheltered in lies. Looking to find a place to shelter artistic minds, to grasp the talents unheard, talent they've blurred, talent they've left behind, to replace with breaking news of breaking hearts and wrap with caution. Take time and time and time again. If only they knew the park is filled with hearts that beat for each other. It's just been redefined, but as it redesigns, the beating will be clear and recombined. Emphatic, roaring, peace of heart, peace of mind, peace of heart, pieces intertwined. As it redesigns, it will show the bright colors splattered against brick walls that with tears, colors that come alive when light skies disappear. Then let the art touch your heart, heart. Children that sing louder than gunshots, sounds that ring louder than sirens, echoing through the park, through Somali tongues to music, into Region Park School of Music, lifting parts of broken hearts out of fear. Voices that empower, that touch not the skin but what lies in here. So hear, but not just with your ears, to listen to the stories of stories often left unclear. Open the doors to Region Park's Film Festival. Lights, cameras and reactions, golden sparks of interaction. Lights, cameras and attractions from all parts of the city. All we asked for was your heart and not your pity. All we asked for was your heart and not your pity. Be the change in the center of a social innovation. Watch every office turn into a foundation of inspiration. Hot desks of motivation as they smoothen the globe. Watch the new world unfold from youth engagement to poverty. Watch veiled eyes unroll. And clear your mind before you enter native art performing arts. Let the soles of your feet feel our mother's breaths in the ground as friction makes a sound, resounding, nature's gifts abounding. Feel as they teach spiritual fundamentals, native arts main credentials. It's the earth we live on, so celebrating their culture should be essential. And dance into Toba's open doors, West African style. Let the beat of the drums harmonize with the beat of your soul and let it travel miles. And even if you're spiritually drained as you dance, just smile. Smile till you can forget sadness and laugh at anger. Until you can look into the eyes of anyone as a future brother and not a stranger. Invest in relationships, you don't need to be a banker. Send your salams to a Muslim, go play dice with a gangster. Redefine stereotypes and send that to the news anchor. Don't judge anyone, it's a small world and we're all neighbors. See everyone as one. Let that be our new culture, along with our own, and let us hone a new art of hearts that have grown. Once close to every chance, now an opportunity to enhance from a spectrum of open gates. Experience, learn and innovate.
So that kid, the power that he's had, the change that he's brought, He's inspiring generations of people to think differently about this place. You know, he's actually sort of mentoring other young people. There are hundreds of them who've come through this place, who themselves are now spreading this world, spreading this word. And it's amazing to see the kind of change of attitude that's come about as a result of this. And while all this sounds kind of maybe inconsequential on some level, intangible on another level, it's actually incredibly powerful. It's the stuff that actually you know, creates distinctiveness in the community, builds a new story. You know, it's changed the experience of this place. Now, hundreds of thousands of people have come into Regent Park, where people used to roll up their window, lock their doors, drive through as quickly as possible. People now actually come and hang out there for a film festival. Corporate leaders bring their kind of social events into our venue. We've had the Prime Minister there, I think, 2 times, our new Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in the last year and a half. So it's become a place as well in the city where it's kind of, whenever there's kind of cultural conflict or tension, when Black Lives Matter and our gay pride folks were in conflict, they came to our venue to sort out their issues, or when the Premier wants to kind of launch her anti-racism strategy, that's where she comes to do it. We also host funerals for young kids in the neighborhood who are still becoming victims of gun violence in the neighborhood, and everything you can imagine under the sun has happened in this building in the course of the last 5 years. And this kind of leads me to the, you know, the last part of the conversation, which is about how do we actually build value together with lots of different people. And you can see here Regent Park, the proximity to the downtown. It's right on the edge of the eastern edge of our downtown in the city. You know, just after the global financial crisis, a couple of guys, Michael Porter, Mark Kramer out of Harvard University, started to kind of write about sort of this concept of shared value. And it really was about how do we bring social progress and corporate interest closer together? How do we reinvent capitalism for the new age so that we actually aren't, it's not all about just making money, but it's actually about bringing those things together. Here's a look at those 2 guys. And importantly, their work really wasn't about just doing corporate social responsibility, something that happens on the margins that, you know, 5% of corporate profits might be invested back in the community. They were actually saying, let's put social progress at the center of business. How do we do that? And so really that's what this project in Regent Park is I think, an example of. Because typically in urban development, you've got the condo or the developer, the residential developer building their high-rises, collecting their profit and moving on as quickly as possible. You've got the public housing agency who are building something that's cheap and utilitarian, probably has to be torn down 40, 50 years hence. You've got the community activists who are protesting and shouting, kind of often ignored, and you've got the artist somewhere in the peanut gallery. And somehow in Regent Park, that's not what's happened. We've actually figured out, rather than fighting for a bigger slice of the pie, we've actually discovered how do you bake a bigger pie so that actually a whole lot more things can happen. And so that's sort of figuring out how to actually bring those interests together in one kind of project, which is what we've done through Daniel Spectrum. So that the public housing agency, we understood, was kind of really interested in social cohesion. How do you take 7,500 people who are sort of living there and bring in another 10,000? How do you build a community around that? You've got sort of the artists who are looking for space to develop their programs. You've got sort of a whole bunch of different other things that the city was trying to accomplish from a public policy perspective. And the developer who's interested in all of those other things was trying to create a market for condominiums where the conventional wisdom was you couldn't sell a single condo. Today there's a multi-billion-dollar market for condominium development in Regent Park. Everything that they put on sale sells out like that. And it's because the story of the place has changed. It's the story that's changed. And it's Mustafa who's helping to do that, right? This is the power of this work. And this is what gives me sort of such hope for the future. Because if we can actually really understand and get more sophisticated about how we leverage the power of art and culture, then we can actually build the kind of communities that we all dream about living in. Places that are vibrant and dynamic, places that kind of exude kind of cultural energy, places that actually sort of are the places that you want to raise your kids in. And so I don't think this is some far-fetched idea that we might disrupt urban development and put culture back at the center of city building. I think it's really about engaging our collective efforts, sort of particularly those in the creative community, having the courage to innovate, and always kind of reaching for a higher common purpose. We have the knowledge, I believe, to disrupt the urban development system, to actually build more prosperous and inclusive communities. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for the future, is how do we build truly inclusive communities? And if we can figure out all those things, I really think we have the power to change the world. So thank you very much.